Good day to you. Welcome to Westchester Talk Radio. I'm John Marino. This is What's Happening in the Lower Hudson Valley. We are produced by Shark Creative, made possible by Robeson Oil, the house that service built, Michael Labriola, landscape design and construction of Armonk Hightower, Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard, and Jaguar Land Rover of New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Kisco, joined by a Westchester guy who we all know very well, Scott Richman, the New York, New Jersey Regional Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Scott, welcome back. It seems like every few months we go through this process of dealing with anti-Semitism and hatred straight out of Jewish people, of Jewish culture, of what this community has done and represents. Why do we keep falling into this continuous cycle?
Well, first of all, John, thanks as always for having me on. Always a pleasure. Really appreciate you giving me and ADL this platform. Yeah, it does seem like that, although we don't always have such high profile cases. I mean, obviously there's something a little bit different here because it's, I deal with anti-Semitic incidents every single day. My office, my staff literally deal with multiple anti-Semitic incidents every day. So these high profile incidents can appear to be just another in a long line, but they're not, because when you have a celebrity or a sports figure making statements that are anti-Semitic, there's a lot more people paying attention.
Kanye West, for example, seemed to kick this whole spate of incidents off a few weeks ago with his DEFCON 3 comment, and it just makes you wonder. He's dealt with Jewish people his whole life, through his whole career, who've helped him get to where he is now, and he's lost a lot of his wealth seemingly as a result. He's still a very wealthy man regardless. What prompts somebody like this, who is part of, in his own way, been involved in the community through the things he's done through the years? How does something like this happen? How does something where someone who's from a community that Jewish people more than any other group helped most of all wind up with thoughts and opinions like this?
So I can't speak to what's in his mind. He's obviously had some mental health challenges. So there's probably a lot that's brewing there. I can't speak to what's in his mind. I can only say that the impact of somebody with 30 million followers on social media making these kinds of statements means that it's incredibly visible, that there are a lot of people who do copycat statements or support him in some way, and that's the sort of fallout we're getting. Kyrie Irving, also a very, very visible sports figure, and that's resulted in a lot of incidents. I mean, we see, for example, the banner drop over the freeway in Los Angeles. Here you have a white supremacist group that's virulently anti-Semitic, and the irony of a white supremacist group mimicking the words of a black man in this country. There's obviously an irony there, and they're doing it because they're using it to gain visibility and notoriety for themselves. If you notice, there was a banner right next to the banner about Kanye. It said the name of their streaming service. They use that streaming service to make money. They sell sweatshirts and T-shirts with anti-Semitic content on it, and they also stream. They taunt Jews in the street, and they stream that for money. So this was all an effort to jump on the bandwagon and get visibility for their own cause. They did it again at the Florida-Georgia game, where they used lasers, and they partnered with the National Socialists in Jacksonville to do that. And of course, they did it right here in Westchester. So I don't know how many of your listeners are aware, because it didn't really make it into the media. But a few days after the Florida-Georgia game, a few days before, the Florida-Georgia game, but a few days after the freeway incident, they were members of this group. And I'm not naming the group on purpose because I don't want to give them any more visibility, but they dropped a banner over an overpass on the Bronx River Parkway in Yonkers that mimicked the same language about Kanye. Very, very disturbing. And of course, this is all free speech. So, there's nothing really that can be done about it. Anybody can unfurl a banner with any kind of statement. And say whatever they wish in this country, and it's not prohibited.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kanye West, his comment again about what he said was he was going to go DEFCON on Jewish people in that comment. You see that and you kind of blow it off to some extent, maybe, and say, well, that's Kanye West. You don't know what he's going to do. You alluded to his mental health challenges. And then just a few days later, we see the Kyrie Irving incident that he had every opportunity to make it go away, and it seemed like he did not. Now, under the guise of free speech, he had a right to say what he did, regardless of what he said, I think. But that doesn't mean anyone has to agree with him. He didn't back off when given opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And then your group, ADL, stepped in and kind of took control of this situation.
So, in the case of Kyrie Irving, he can say whatever he wants. He's not going to be arrested for it. But a person like that makes very irresponsible statements and needs to take responsibility for it. And, it seemed like he was going down a good path. He made the statement on a Friday or Thursday night, and or he tweeted about this film then. And on Saturday, he kind of doubled down. But by Sunday, he had removed the post. And a couple of days later, ADL, working with the Nets, he agreed to take responsibility for his actions. And we thought we were on a good path. But then when questioned again, he had trouble condemning anti-Semitism. And that was extremely problematic. Now, I will say that the Nets and Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, the NBA, were all extraordinary. I mean, they came out, unlike in the case of Kanye West, where those who were connected to him did not condemn it immediately. Joe Tsai, the Nets, the NBA, did condemn it immediately on that Friday and continued to condemn it. And to the point where when Kyrie Irving did not or was not able to condemn anti-Semitism unequivocally, they suspended him. They suspended him with clear conditions for his return.
Which has not happened yet, and there's no word as to when his return might happen. One thing that disturbs me now is I see some players in the NBA Players Association, and I know their union, and Kyrie Irving is a vice president of the union, that some players, like a Jaylen Brown with the Celtics, for example, they're surprised basically or disappointed that Kyrie Irving has yet to be reinstated. And that tells me they're not getting exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were clear conditions there. It doesn't seem so hard to unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism, to take responsibility for what he's done, to agree to some sort of training, sensitivity training. There's a monetary commitment in there to give money for causes which build bridges of understanding. I mean, all of these seem sort of obvious. And then he needs to have a meeting with Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, and Joe needs to be convinced that he has come far enough along. None of these seem too arduous. They all seem like they make sense to me, but he hasn't quite made it there yet.
I was really impressed by Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, and his turning down the $1 million that Kyrie originally offered and said, you can't buy your way out of this. You can't buy your way out of anti-Semitism. And I think there's no higher statement than that could be made.
Yeah, the $500,000 that he offered. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, it's we thought we were going down a good path because he was clearly taking responsibility, and as part of taking responsibility, giving money to causes that build bridges like ADL made sense. But if he's not going to take responsibility, then we're not at a stage yet to accept that donation and begin to carry this out.
Mm-hmm. And then we see things go a step further with Dave Chappelle, who was guest hosting on SNL Saturday Night Live a few days ago, and his opening comments, his opening riff about how Kanye West could have bought time with the Jewish community, or how Jewish people dress like Run DMC. Some people say, and I've read some people of Jewish background write into area newspapers and say, lighten up, we've dressed like Run DMC way before Run DMC came around, so they copied from us maybe, and yet maybe we should all ethnically be able to take a good joke in stride. Now, I understand Dave Chappelle, he's spoken out against wokeness and cancel culture and things like this, but is his opening riff taking things a bit too far right now?
I think so. I mean, it definitely fanned the flames, in this moment with rising anti-Semitism for the past few years, really to historically high levels. ADL's audit of anti-Semitic incidents showed that last year was the highest year on record for anti-Semitic incidents. With the backdrop of that, with the backdrop of these very visible sports celebrity figures making anti-Semitic comments, to just sort of come in. I mean, we understand satire, and everybody loves a good joke, and he certainly uses this sort of ethnic jokes. I mean, he's not limiting his jokes to the Jewish community. He offends lots of people, but this goes a little bit too far when you fan the flames like that. And we become the butt of those jokes. People clapping in the audience for what was clearly deeply offensive jokes. That's painful. That can be traumatic, and we don't think it has a place.
Are you worried about the upcoming holiday season here now, as to, well, maybe in light of all this, that attacks and incidents can increase?
Look, we're always worried about incidents. We certainly had multiple incidents in this region just before the pandemic that were horrific. The Jersey City shooting, the stabbing attack in Muncie. For us, coming out of the pandemic was the sort of fear that we were going to go back to where we were at the end of 2019. We're commemorating those events. By the way, there's going to be a commemoration of the Jersey City shooting on the steps of City Hall in Jersey City on December 8th at 5:30 p.m. We're also planning a program in Rockland commemorating the Muncie shooting. So for us, this is a time of year where it becomes where Jews become a little bit more visible in that way. But there's sort of a different focus that's been brought to it. I don't know if you're aware of the Shine a Light campaign.
Yeah.
Your listeners can go to shinealighton.org, I think, either .org or .com. And you will see Shine a Light. That's an effort to shine a light on anti-Semitism around Hanukkah. So really for the month of December, there are going to be a series of programs, events, partnerships with corporations, with schools, to shine a light on anti-Semitism. So we use this time of year where there may be heightened awareness to make sure that people really do know. On December 19th, there's going to be a major event in Times Square. And this major event in Times Square is going to have, elected officials and celebrities performing, and it's all in an effort to shine a light on the issue of anti-Semitism.
Scott Richman is the New York, New Jersey Regional Director, Westchester guy of the Anti-Defamation League. Scott, we look at the history of civil rights in this country and the various groups that have been involved. We see Michael Schwerner, who, of course, grew up in Pelham, attended Pelham Memorial High. His mother taught at New Rochelle High School, and he was, of course, one of the victims of what happened in Mississippi back in the mid-1960s. We see James Chaney, an African-American man who was with him, and Andrew Goodman, who grew up in New York City and I believe in Queens, too, and that horrific incident back then in the mid-1960s down in Mississippi. We see the way Black people and Jewish people worked together back then and through the decades, and yet we see, to me, too much animosity between the two groups, and I think it's coming mostly from one side, obviously, unfortunately. I hate to say that, but we're in this area here, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, the Northeast, the most diverse ethnically and religiously area of this country. To me, every ethnic group in this area, we're all part of each other. We all have, because we all grew up together, we all have a little something of each other within us. What's the crux of all of this problems that are going on between all these different communities now in this area, where it seems like the Jewish community is biggest recipients of all of this too?
So I avoid stereotyping, and I wouldn't stereotype to make any broad statements about any group. And I think we need some perspective here. There is a serious rise in anti-Semitism, but there's also a serious rise in violence against Asians, in attacks on the LGBTQ plus community, especially online, attacks against Latinos, attacks against Muslims, and certainly attacks against African Americans. I mean, if we look at the FBI hate crimes data, the most recent hate crimes data was for 2020. The 2021 figures haven't come out yet. You'll see that African Americans are the group that is actually the victim of more hate crimes than any other group in this country. Jews are disproportionately attacked, in terms of hate crimes in this country, but among faith groups. So if you compare us to Muslims or Christians, we are disproportionately the victims, but there are other groups that are attacked more. There has been a general rise in hate. And I don't like, people often put Jews in a vacuum where, our experience is sort of singular. It's not. There's been a general rise in hate against all minority groups or many minority groups, and we are the victim of that as well. And I think the forces that have caused that general rise in hate are forces that are not unique to the Jewish community. We are victims of it like others, like social media, which is a big driver of hate, like the polarization that we experience. And of course, we've just gone through the midterm elections. So, that there's a really good example of the divides in this country, like the emboldening of extremists. You wouldn't have seen an extremist group unfurling a banner over a highway just a few years ago, but the social penalties for doing so are just not what they were a few years ago. They've been emboldened. These kinds of factors, coupled with the moment that we're in, a lot of stresses on society, and people look for scapegoats when there's stresses on society. So, we have COVID, we have the economy and inflation and the midterms. And I mean, there's Ukraine, like everywhere you turn, there's stresses on society, and people look for scapegoats that may come out in the form of hate. And it, comes out in the form of hate against many groups. We certainly are a victim of it, but I don't, the Jews, but I don't want to look at this in a singular way. And we all need to come together. We all need to band together and find a way to fight this collectively. I mean, traditionally, the way to control hate is civil society. Civil society unites and pushes hate to the margins. They decide what's unacceptable and they push it to the margins of society where it's difficult for it to hold sway. That's very hard in a moment of polarization.
Is there a way legislatively, and I know we want to strike the right checks and balances between freedom of speech, and yet you can't go into a crowded theater and yell fire. That we know. Is there a way to legislate any of this, that freedom of speech, yes, and when you cross a certain verbal or maybe written line on social media or pictorial line on social media, that we can step in legally to make sure we knock this off and calm it down right then and there?
Yeah, certainly legislatively, our laws provide the guardrails. They don't change hearts and minds. You change hearts and minds through education and education programs, and we can talk about that if you want. But legislative approaches to this definitely provide important guardrails. And there are ways that we can approach this. ADL has put forth several plans over the past few years. One of those plans is called the Repair Plan. And repair is actually an acronym. So each of the letters, REPAIR, stands for a different aspect. It's all about fighting hate in digital spaces. It's about social media and how to approach social media. Your listeners can look it up, ADL Repair, and you'll find it right away. But these are different elements for fighting hate in digital spaces. And a piece of that is legislatively. And here we have to look to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That is the law that governs social media. It is a law that was put in place in 1996. And that law says that content that is put on websites, you cannot be held liable. The website cannot be held liable for that content. Now that is the complete opposite of traditional media, because newspapers, television, and radio can be held responsible for the content that is on their medium. But with websites, no, it's going to be completely different, because in 1996 they said, we don't want to stifle this new medium. There's information coming from too many different sources, and we don't want to say that that a website is responsible for information coming from thousands of sources. So that was fine, except they didn't anticipate what was coming. And in 2004, 8 years later, social media comes along, Facebook comes along, Mark Zuckerberg, and that starts a whole revolution in social media, and it starts a whole revolution in content coming from billions of sources, most of which are fine, and most of which give voice to important opinions in this country, but a small minority of which is filled with hateful rhetoric. And how you control that hateful rhetoric at this moment in time, and here we are, 26 years later, still living with that same legislation. It has not been changed in any way. How you control that is not legislatively. There are no legislative guardrails when it comes to social media. The only guardrails that exist are those that are imposed, self-imposed by the social media companies. These are private companies. So Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, they have policies that are called content moderation policies, but they are self-imposed. They create those policies and they enforce them. And that's the way we manage hateful speech. So, ADL has played a big role in pressing them for more stringent policies, and we've pressed them to enforce those policies once they've put them in place. And I'll give you an example. Mark Zuckerberg, for many years, said as much as he abhors Holocaust denial, he would never stop it from being on his site because he believes in the free exchange of ideas. But after pressure, ADL being one of the entities that pressured Facebook, in October 2020, he announced Holocaust denial will no longer be permitted on Facebook. The problem is that if you go to Facebook today, you're going to find groups that are devoted to Holocaust denial because they don't enforce it, or they don't enforce it enough, or they find it hard to enforce it, or they enforce it in English, but they don't enforce it in other languages. So, it's very important that we find a way, and this is the long version of my answer to your question. It's very important that we find a way to reform Section 230. That's a very important legislative guardrail so that there's some way to govern social media. We saw this with Buffalo. So here you have a young man radicalized on social media who does this, horrific shooting at the top supermarket in Buffalo. I was there. I went to Buffalo. I was there for 3 days in the wake of the shooting. I was there for several reasons, but one of the things that I did was I spoke to the media, and they all wanted to know what we can do about social media. And, we saw the fallout of that. Governor Hochul standing up and saying, we must deal with social media. Attorney General Tish James, we must deal with social media. And they're each trying to find ways. So these are government approaches, legislative approaches to dealing with social media. That would take us a long way towards curbing hate. We also have something called the PROTECT Plan. The PROTECT Plan, again, it's an acronym. This is for managing extremists. And again, it's a whole series of legislation like the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act that goes along with that. And that was introduced in the wake of January 6th. So for us, we've been battling extremists for years, but we proposed important pieces of legislation following what happened on January 6th.
Take a moment to tell us about some of those educational programs.
So look, here I spoke about already two ways to control hate. I spoke about legislation and I spoke about civil society. Legislation is important, but it's only the guardrails. It doesn't change hearts and minds. And civil society is very important, but civil society is not going to control hate if there's something else in their hearts and minds. So how do you change hearts and minds? It's education. ADL has taken that to heart, and we are an enormous purveyor of anti-bias, anti-bullying, anti-hate programs in this country. We believe, just like reading, math, science, these are all very important subjects. in K-12 spaces, students should also be learning how to respect one another, respect who is sitting across from them, celebrating difference, celebrating diversity of the people in their school, in their world. So we carry out these programs, which currently touch more than 4 million students a year. We do this certainly across my region, which is New York and New Jersey. Something close to 400 schools are participating in these programs right now, including dozens throughout Westchester who are participating in these programs. And the problem is that many times schools come to us when they have an incident. There's a swastika at the school or some sort of bias incident. They come to us and they say, ADL, we need your help. We've had an incident. We help them through the incident. It's a big piece of our work, incident response. And then they say, we want to use this as a teachable moment. And then they bring in some of this programming, whether it's at the elementary school, middle school, or high school. We offer different types of programming depending on the age. But I don't want to be in the school after there's an incident. I want to be in the school before. I want to have that relationship in place. I want them to know these resources. So if, God forbid, there is an incident, they'll know how to act right away. They'll be able to relate to all of the resources and all of the training that their staff has had and their students have experienced.
Scott Richman, give us all of your ADL contact information, phone number, website, everything we need to know. Absolutely.
So first of all, for your listeners, I do a podcast, and it's a very short podcast. It's just 10 or 11 minutes every week. It's a weekly podcast, and I pick one ADL issue, one thing that's on my mind, that's on ADL's mind, and I sort of tackle it, sort of bite-sized way to stay connected to this work. And it's called From the Frontlines. Frontlines is one word and it's plural, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or Spotify. For me, social media is a very important way to be in the conversation, and I want others to be in the conversation with me. So follow me on Twitter, at Scott A. Richman, middle initial A, all one word, is my handle on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Instagram. So that's a very important way to be in touch. If you want to send me, if you want to be in touch with me, you can do it through the ADL New York, New Jersey website. You can find contact information there. ADL New York, New Jersey. I'm the director of that, and that's the easiest way to be in touch.
Scott Richman, we thank you as always. We'll talk again, and all the best. Happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays.
Thank you. Scott Richman is the New York and New Jersey Regional Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, here on What's Happening in the Lower Hudson Valley. I'm John Marino on Westchester Talk Radio, produced by Shark Creative, made possible by Robeson Oil, the house that service built, Michael Lambriola, landscape design and construction of our month, also by Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard, and Jaguar Land Rover of New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Kisco. Catch all of our Westchester, Rockland, Putnam, Dutchess, Orange, and Fairfield County Talk Radio programming on our YouTube channel, Shark Creative YouTube. Download our Westchester Talk Radio app. Take it with you 24/7, 365. And yes, we are now on Apple Podcasts, too.